Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Swamiji.
Good evening, Dave.
Good evening, Swamiji. Good evening.
Swamiji. Pranam.
Yes.
Good morning, Maharaj.
Yes, good
evening
morning
to
to you. Yes, good morning. Good
morning,
evening,
Maharaj.
Mr. and Mrs. Carmen.
Good evening, Swami.
Good to see you both together.
Thank you.
voice
Yeah.
Hari Om Swamiji. Hari Om.
Yes, Hari Om. And good
We
evening.
saw the lotuses.
When? Today?
No, we came there very next day over the weekend.
All the lotus we saw.
Oh, we,
So
are,
beautiful.
Wonderful.
we have more now.
Okay.
We will come tomorrow if possible.
Yes, now.
What time of day did you take the picture? Because they are all open.
It's around noon, but they
Noon.
open up by 9.
By 9? Okay, so we'll try and come again and take a picture with them open.
Yeah. Good evening, Noel.
Good evening, Swamiji.
Yes. Good evening, Lankeshwar ji.
Good evening, Swamiji.
Good evening, Bijaya ji.
Good evening, Swamiji. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Good evening, Nanak ji. Good evening.
Namaste, Swamiji.
Yes, namaste. I had an opportunity to participate in the spiritual retreat.
Yes, last week it was very good.
Last week, yes. That's a good one. Suresh ji, good evening.
Good evening, Swamiji.
Yes. Lalita ji, good morning to you, right?
Pranam, Maharaj. Yes.
Pranam.
Good morning.
Dave, good evening.
Good evening, Swamiji.
Yes. Manish Babu, good evening to you.
Namaskar, Swamiji.
Yes. Parekh ji, good evening. Paul and Linda, good evening.
Good evening, Swami.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Kales. Good evening, Mrs. Johnson. Good evening, Sundarji.
Namaste, Swamiji.
Yes. Good evening, Barbara. And good morning to you, Devanjali. Okay. Yes, Barbara.
Good evening.
Yes. All right. So it's time for us to start. Okay. Today, I think there will be a few participants less. They have a meeting. All right. We shall start with chanting the Vedic peace chants. Okay, today we shall chant peace chant 3 and 4. First, we shall read the translation together. Om, O gods, may we hear auspicious words with the ears. May we see auspicious things with the eyes. While praising the gods with steady limbs, may we enjoy a life that is beneficial to all. May Indra of ancient fame be auspicious to us. May the all-knowing Pusha, god of earth, be propitious with us or propitious to us. May Garuda, the destroyer of evil, be well disposed towards us. May Brihaspati ensure our welfare. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto all. So first we shall chant in call and response manner, then we shall chant along. And today I have done one thing. I have placed some, vertical lines to remind myself where to give the pause. When we shall be chanting in a call and response, we shall chant in pieces, not the entire sentence together. Later on, when we shall chant along, we shall chant the entire sentence together. Okay, so these are the vertical lines. Okay, so now call and response. Om Bhadram Karnevhihi. Om Bhadram Karnevhihi. Shrunuyama Devaha. Shrunuyama Devaha. Bhadram Pashyemaksha. Bhadram Pashyemaksha. Virya Yatraha. Virya Yatraha. Sthirairangai. Sthirairangai. Stuštuvagam. Stuštuvagam. Shastanuvihi. Shastanuvihi. Vyashema devahitam. Vyashema devahitam. Yadayuhu. Yadayuhu. Shasti na indro. Shasti na indro. Vriddhashavaha. Vriddhashavaha. Shasti na pusha. Shasti na pusha. Vishwavedaha. Vishwavedaha. Shasti nastaksho. Shasti nastaksho. Arishtanemihi. Arishtanemihi. Shasti no brihaspatir. Shasti no brihaspatir. Dadhatu. Dadhatu. Om Shantihi. 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 Om Shantihi. 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 Okay, now we shall chant along. First time in a slower pace, then in a faster pace. Om Bhadram Karnevhihi. Shrunuyama Devaha. Bhadram Pashyemaksha. Virya Yatraha. Sthirairangai. Stuštuvagam Shastanuvihi. Vyashema devahitam yadayuhu. Shasti na indro vriddhashavaha. Shasti na pusha vishwavedaha. Shasti nastaksho arishtanemihi. Shasti no brihaspatir dadhatu. Om Shantihi. 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 Now let's try a little faster. ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षवीर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागं शस्तनुभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्ताक्षो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्तिः 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 Now, please chant 4. Om is the best sound of all Vedas. It arose from the nectarine essence of the Vedas. May I hold the immortal teaching in my mind. May my body be strong. May my speech be sweet. May I hear a lot of wisdom. O Om, you are the receptacle of the supreme truth. May I never forget all that I have learned. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto all. Call and response. Om Yas Chandasam. Om Yas Chandasam. Rishabho Rishabho Vishwarupaha Vishwarupaha Chandobhyodhya Chandobhyodhya Mritaat Mritaat Sambhabhuva Sambhabhuva Samendro Samendro Medhaya Medhaya Sprinotu Sprinotu Amritasva Amritasva Devadharano Devadharano Bhuyasam Bhuyasam Shariram me Shariram me Vicharshanam Vicharshanam Jihuva me Madhumattama Madhumattama Karna Abhyam Karna Abhyam Bhuri Vishruvam Bhuri Vishruvam Brahmana Brahmana Koshosi Koshosi Medhaya Medhaya Pihitaha Pihitaha Shrutam me Gopaya Gopaya Om Shantihi 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 Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Now chant aloud. ॐ यश्छन्दसां ऋषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यामितात् सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्वदेवधारणो भूयासम् शरीरं मे विचर्षणम् जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरिविश्रुवम् ब्रह्मण कोशोऽसि ब्रह्मण कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. A bit faster. Let's try. ॐ यश्छन्दसां ऋषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यामितात् सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्वदेवधारणो भूयासम् शरीरं मे विचर्षणम् जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरिविश्रुवम् ब्रह्मणः कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. All right. How did you find it? Difficult? Getting easier with time?
Yes.
Getting a bit easier, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. All about practice. Learning new things, All right. So now to Narada Bhakti Sutras, the text we are studying. We have seen that Narada, after dedicating a few aphorisms on Parabhakti, that supreme love, ecstatic love for God, has come to the present section where he is taking up the opinions of other teachers, what they speak, what according to the other teachers, the characteristics of bhakti, parabhakti is. And as we noted earlier, parabhakti, supreme devotion, although essentially the same, but it may manifest as in different forms or different styles in accordance with the practitioner. First, so we saw that according to Vyasa, Narada quoted Vyasa. According to Vyasa, love in ritualistic worship, when someone has got a spontaneous love, a deep love in worship, that is a sign of devotion. Then we saw, according to Garga, love in engaging katha. Katha means discussing, hearing, singing divine glories or divine lila, the divine play of the incarnations. That is, according to sage Garga, is a sign of devotion. Then we saw in the last aphorism, according to Shandilya, another sage, Atma Rati Abiridheno, a unobstructed absorption in the self within, the divine within, is a characteristic of Parabhakti. This is how Parabhakti gets manifested in the life of the devotees. Now, we saw that Narada chose these three among many teachers of bhakti. He chose three. Probably there is a pattern. The pattern is puja is kaika, with your body. Katha, engaging in and listening, singing of divine glory, is related to speech, vak. Then comes absorption in the self, which is mental, manasik. And we noted that in Vedanta we find total engagement means kaika, vachika and manasika, with your physical body, with your speech and with your mind. With all those three, if we can engage, then the bhakti, it can be an wholesome bhakti. And that's the pattern we probably can see in the last aphorisms. Now, Narada will present his own take on bhakti. Let's see what Narada Bhakti, Parabhakti is according to Narada himself. Aphorism 19. Aphorism 19 is a bit long, so we shall read it aloud. Let me read it fast to you. Naradaha tu tat arpita akhilo acharata tat bismarane parama vyakulata iti. So let's read it aloud together, okay? So read it aloud with me. Naradaha tu tat arpita akhila acharata tat bismarane parama vyakulata iti. All right. So syntax is like this. Tu naradaha iti. Arpita akhila acharata tat. Parama vyakulata bismarane tat. Tu is known to all of us. Tu means but. However, Naradaha is Narada. Iti says. But Narada says bhakti is arpita, surrendering akhila, all, acharata, actions, tat, to God. And parama, intense, vyakulata, anguish, bismarane, in forgetting, tat, God. So we get this translation. Narada says, Bhakti is surrendering all actions to God and intense anguish in forgetting God. So we saw that according to last three aphorisms, Bhakti is total engagement with physical body, then speech and mind. Here Narada, tu starts with tu means but, however. So it does not mean he is contradicting what others have said before, but his own view of bhakti is what he is going to say, and he starts with tu, but. And we see Narada's view of bhakti is more comprehensive, which covers all the three above. That is physical engagement with verbal engagement and mental engagement, and even beyond. And Narada's definition we will find is a culmination of all the three previous practices of bhakti. So according to Narada, there are two characteristics of para-bhakti, supreme devotion. One is total surrender to God, and number two is intense anguish in forgetting God. Both of them are very important, and we should understand it well. So let us try to understand first what is total surrender. So Narada does not narrow down the life of a bhakta only to rituals, puja, which was Vyasa's view, or chanting of God's name, which was Garga's view, or mental engagement, Atmarati, which was Sandilya's view. He includes all activities, dedicating or surrendering all activities to God. According to him, complete surrender to God is the chief characteristic of para-bhakti. Doing all the activities with the firm idea in mind that all this is for God alone. Akhila acharata. Akhila means all. Acharata means actions. All action. So, including so-called secular actions or actions which we usually don't bring under the umbrella of bhakti. And Narada says dedicating all actions to God is bhakti. So this is not a piecemeal thing that every act I am doing and then dedicating it to God. It is more an attitude, change of attitude in the bhakta. It comes from a sense of total surrender. And this total surrender to God is a recurrent theme in Vedanta scriptures, starting from Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga, Puranas. Everywhere we find again and again mention of this total surrender to God. Let's try to understand this. Katha Upanishad says that this Atma is subtler than the subtle and greater than the great, which lives in the heart of every being. One who is free from desire sees or experiences the glory of that Atman by the grace of God. By the grace of God. Again we find in Katha Upanishad, Yamayo Vaishe Binute Tehno Labhyo, that Nayam Atma Pravachanena Labhyo. This Atman cannot be realized only through lectures or engagement in discussion, not even through mind or intellect, but whomsoever, that Atman, that God residing in our own heart, whomsoever God blesses, they have this vision. In Bhagavad Gita, again in chapter 9, we find Sri Krishna says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give, whatever austerities you undertake, all that you offer to me. Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 27. Yat karoshi yad asnasi. That famous verse. Yat juhosi dadashi yat. Yat tapassasi kaunteo tat kurushva madarpanam. So, whatever you are doing, you are surrendering to me. And again we find another beautiful hymn, Shiva Manasa Puya. There it is, last stanza. It is all a small one consisting of 4 stanzas. Last stanza says that the devotee is addressing Shiva, that thou art my Atma and my intelligence, Buddhi, is none other than Parvati, Shiva's consort, and my sense organs, my life forces, vital forces are what? Your attendants. My body is your abode, that is temple of the Lord. Then whatever I experience in the world is just your worship. My sleep is the state of samadhi, and when I walk, it is circumambulation of you. All the words and speeches are hymns about you. Whatever action I perform, O Sambhu, it is all your worship alone. Sambhu is another name of Shiva. Atmatam Girija Mati Sahachara Prana Shariram Griham Pujate Vishayopa Bhoga Rachana Nidra Samadhi Sthiti. What a beauty. So whatever we are experiencing through our 5 senses, it is just like as it is worship of the Lord. Worship of the Lord sitting in our heart. Samchara padayo padakshana vidhi stotrani sarvagiro. Whatever I am speaking, it is hymns to you. Yad yat karma karomi tat tat akhilam shambho tava aradhanam. Whatever I am doing is your worship. This is the expression of a devotee of God. Again in Gita we find towards the end, chapter 18, verse 66, Sri Krishna says, abandon all rights and duties, just take refuge in me alone. Surrender to me. What it is like, surrendering to God, what it is like, what it feels like. Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu gives an example. What this Sharanagati or total surrender means. It is, he says, he gives an example of cow. Let us substitute the example with house. It is like we have a house, now I have sold the house to someone else. So now no longer the house belongs to me and I am not concerned about the house anymore. It is someone else's property. So when this attitude of surrender comes, Bhakta, the devotee, feels that me, my entire being, is now property of God. Whatever is in me belongs to God. It is God's responsibility to look after me, to take care of me. So anything and everything we are doing for God alone, because we are property of God. So the self-surrender comes only when there is complete effacement of ego. We have now an ego, a sense of being, that I am this, I am that, and in self-surrender, total surrender, what happens? That ego is substituted by the ego of God or identity of God. Sri Ramakrishna gives nice example. He says there are two types of ego. One is unripe ego. Unripe ego is connected with the perishable things in the world, perishable identities. I am such, I am, identities that we create in our, in accordance with our, activity, in our social status or our educational qualifications. But ripe ego is connected with God. Like, I am God's child, I am a devotee of God, I am beloved of God. That is ripe ego. So in complete surrender, what happens? This identity changes. Identity no longer I am identifying myself with these perishable things of the world. Bhakta's identity revolves around God. Bhakta's identity revolves around God. Well, we may think that this complete surrender to God is a passive state of being. No, it is not so. Complete surrender gives tremendous courage and enthusiasm to a devotee. Before that, we find ourselves to be this small something, this body, this mind. But when we have surrendered to God, what we find, there's a huge power at my back. Huge power at my back. That's why we find those who have surrendered, they have tremendous courage and tremendous enthusiasm. These things really difficult to understand unless we have seen in our own eyes such examples. And I'm fortunate to have seen such examples. In one of our ashramas, there is a Swami who is shining example of, what kind of enthusiasm this self-surrender can bring. It's a big ashrama, and that Swami, it does not hold any position as such. Okay, he's not in charge. Simple, just no position, but entire ashrama revolves around its Swami. He is the hub of the center, that ashrama. Whatever, anybody, everybody, any need, any problem, anything to consult, run to that Swami. He is kind of hub of that Swami. We used to call him the mother of the ashrama. He is just like a mother of the ashrama, with always happily, joyingly, without any stress of ego, serving others. So if he did not have this firm conviction or firm idea that all this is what I am doing in serving God alone, I am sure he would have felt burned out, what we call burnt out. A tremendous love for God is secret of such enthusiasm of that Swami. So I have seen him that he is kind of total submission to God, and that's why he is such a center of love and service. Wonderful, wonderful. This is what surrender, even to some degree, to that the degree we can do that, to that extent we will be empowered, we'll become powerful, we'll have enthusiasm for that. In probably last or the class before, I mentioned Navadha Bhakti, nine types of bhakti mentioned in the Bhagavata Puranam, which are practiced by the Krishna Bhaktas, the Vaishnavas. The last one is Atma Nivedana, final one, ninth one, offering oneself to God. According to them, that is the culmination of devotion, total surrender to God. Then Patanjali, in Yoga Sutras, we find Ishara Pranidhana. Ishara means God without any specific name. And Pranidhana is literally means to place oneself down, to prostrate, to submit. So Ishara Pranidhana means devotional submission to God. Patanjali mentions Ishara Pranidhana in three contexts, and very important and interesting for us to also follow. In three contexts, Patanjali mentions Ishara Pranidhana, total surrender, total devotional surrender to God. First, he mentions in the first chapter itself, aphorism number 23, where he first speaks about how to achieve samadhi, which is the goal of yoga. He starts with abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa means, and this abhyasa and vairagya are for the highest type of yogi who have already ekagra mind, already a focused mind. For them to achieve samadhi, two practices are needed. One is abhyasa, that is trying to remain in that focused state of mind for a longer period of time, that is abhyasa. And vairagya, that is withdrawing the mind from the entire world of things. That is the way of achieving samadhi. And then he goes on that depending upon how strong the withdrawal or vairagya, dispassion is, and how consistently one can practice to remain in that one pointed state. Depending upon these two, one will be qualified to get samadhi. And when we read them, we find they are formidable, beyond our capacity. Then, as if, one of the commentators, Al-Biruni, who was a visitor, Al-Biruni, who visited India and who read Yoga Sutra, he asks at that point, is there an easier way to get samadhi? Then Patanjali says, aphorism 23, Ishara pranidhanat va, or surrender to God can expedite your experience of samadhi. When, according to Patanjali, when we surrender lovingly to God and God becomes pleased with the yogi, bestows the gift of samadhi. God bestows grace upon the yogi. Vyasa, the commentator, says samadhi becomes quickly available with this surrender. Another commentator, Bhoja, says what is surrender? Devoting all one's action to God, desiring nothing for oneself. Exactly what Narada is saying here. Another commentator says, Vijnana Bhikshu says, by meditating on God with love, the yogi earns God's favor. It is the best means for attaining Sampragyata Samadhi. Since one does not have to depend then solely on one's steam and resources. So trying to achieve samadhi through abhyasa and vairagya, practice, concentration and dispassion, is just like depending upon your own steam or own resources. But when we surrender to God, God takes care of that and bestows samadhi to the yogi. In this context, though, surrender to God is optional. In this context, surrender to God is optional, right? Ba. Samadhi, abhyasa and vairagya is one means. Another means is self-surrender. Surrender to God in this context is optional. But when we find in chapter 2, Sadhana Pada, chapter 2, the first aphorism of chapter 2 defines Kriya Yoga. And Kriya Yoga is for the middling yogi who are in the uh, in the in the middle rung of the would say the qualification of the yogis who are moderate. For them, Kriya Yoga is the method to achieve samadhi. Patanjali says, by performing Kriya Yoga, samadhi is attained and obstacles for samadhi are weakened. And what is Kriya Yoga? Tapa, Sadhaya, Ishara Pranidhana. Here again, Ishara Tapa means control, discipline. Sadhaya means study, deep thinking about what we are studying. And Ishara Pranidhana is total surrender to God. So for them, devotional surrender is mandatory. Mandatory. Surrender is mandatory in Kriya Yoga. Again we find in second chapter itself in Aphorism 32, where Patanjali is speaking about Ashtanga Yoga, 8 limbs of yoga. And the second limb of Ashtanga Yoga is what? Yama is the first, second is Niyama. Niyama means the do's, right? What are they? Niyama consists of 5 practices. One is Shaucha, purity, Santosha, contentment, Tapaha, some degree of austerity or discipline, again Sadhaya, study, and Ishara Pranidhana, devotional surrender to God. Okay, and after this, Patanjali speaks about that what are the benefits of practicing all this yama and niyama. He goes on that if you practice this, you will find this power has come to you. For example, one who has practiced truthfulness, what will happen? Whatever they will speak will come to fruition. That's how he goes on. 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. If someone practices and becomes established on those practices, immense benefits come. For example, he says from the practice of contentment, Shantosha, which is the second niyama, what happens? Unsurpassable joy comes to the yogi. Among all the yama and niyama, the last one, Ishara Pranidhana, is different from all these practices, all these benefits. All the other 9 benefits are mostly worldly in nature. Only Ishara Pranidhana is otherworldly. From there comes Samadhi. So he says, Aphorism 45, Samadhi Siddhihi Ishara Pranidhanat. What happens if someone surrenders to God? Ishara Pranidhanat Samadhi Siddhi. One achieves, experience Samadhi. So in short, according to Patanjali, devotional surrender to God expedite the process of Samadhi. In Bhagavad Gita, we find Arjuna asks Sri Krishna, chapter 12, who is superior? Those who worship God with devotion, or those who are trying to meditate or fix their minds on their own Atma, indwelling self? Sri Krishna replies, what? The devotee who is trying to connect with God through devotion are the best. Even though those who are trying to fix their mind on Atma or indwelling self, they too will attain God. But devotee is Yuktatama, best among the yogis. Then he goes on like this, the difficulty of those whose minds are connected to Atman is greater. So it is difficult to fix the mind on Atman than those who fix their mind on God in devotion. The path of impersonal Atman is attained with difficulty, but those who meditates on God, worships God, considers God to be the highest goal, dedicates all their actions to God, those whose thoughts are always immersed in God, God quickly becomes the deliverer from the ocean of death and transmigration. So that is the beauty of Charanagati, Atma Nivedana, Tad Arpito Akhilo Acharata. All activity or with the sense of I am doing only for God. Now the question is how to surrender. How to surrender to God. So they say there are 2 views in this and both are correct. One is total surrender comes spontaneously. One cannot try that. Willfully one cannot do that. They say it is just like falling asleep. If we try hard to fall asleep, we won't be able to fall asleep. Sleep comes naturally. So, is it the reason why Narada said the 3 previous modes of worship, devotion? So, is it so that with the practice of puja, katha, and atmarati, worship, chanting God's name, and thinking about God, in due course makes the devotee fully surrender to God? That is one view, that real surrender comes from other practices spontaneously. When we have done other practices, in due course the total surrender comes. But the other view is surrender can be practiced too. For a seeker, now and then the seeker can practice to think about God, or offering whatever they are doing, offering it to God. Maybe once in a while, in the morning, in the noon, in the evening, or sometimes, some people think like that. Every hour, I will at least think once about God. They give an alarm in their smart watches, which, buzzes every hour once, and they remind themselves about their relationship with God. So initially, this self-surrender is not easy. It is not real too. We are trying to dedicate our actions to God, but again, we are taking it back. See, if we have surrendered, we should not be worried, but we surrender again, start worrying. Because we give and take it back. But with time, as we go on practicing, surrendering activities to God, reminding ourselves once in a while, every now and then about God, with due course of time, that becomes an habit. Then the devotee feels that whatever they are doing for God alone. And as I said, the best example is to think about that now I am the property of God. Okay, so always this idea will be at the back of the mind. Whatever I am doing is related to God alone. What happens after complete surrender? Our own ego is substituted by the ego of God. I am the beloved of God. I am the child of God. I am child of Holy Mother. I am friend of Sri Ramakrishna. These identities come in the place of our old identities. Now, question is, if every activity should be surrendered to God, can illegal, immoral, adharmika activities too can be surrendered to God? The answer is no. A devotee from the depth of their heart won't find it easy to surrender illegal, immoral, adharmic activities to God. Very soon they will find they cannot either do that illegal, immoral work, and even if they do, they cannot surrender that kind of work to activities to God. Example is Girish Ghosh, one great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, and he had many bad habits, many wrong habits. And he told Sri Ramakrishna, I cannot do anything, any spiritual practice, so you have to do something for me. So Sri Ramakrishna says, okay, surrender to me completely. You don't have to do anything. Girish Ghosh thought, it's a great thing. Okay, I am surrendering to you. I don't have to do anything. Then he said that later on he understood what a profound thing that was. Everything he was doing, every thought he was thinking, thought kept on coming to his mind that I have surrendered everything of mine to Sri Ramakrishna. Okay, so he said that I could no longer engage in those bad habits, because idea was I have given my everything to Sri Ramakrishna. Now how I can engage in this type of activities? So that is self-surrender, and this is indeed difficult for us to understand, because we think that how can we live without our identity, without our individuality? right? So it is difficult for us to even imagine what total surrender means. But in Bhakti tradition, total surrender is the hallmark of devotion. Hallmark of devotion. Second part of the aphorism was we were lost in the first part, that is surrendering all activities to God. But there is a second part. Second part is what? Tad vismarane parama vyakulata. Great anguish if the devotee forgets God. So a devotee who has really achieved parabhakti and who surrenders every activities to God, they do not forget God even for a moment. But if at all they forget, then they feel great anguish. And as the joy of unification with God is great, so also the pain of separation is also great. We find in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, after he had his initial vision of Mother Kali, he had intense yearning to have that vision again and again. And we read that he would roll on the ground crying that why I am not getting that vision. Such is the anguish. So also will anguish of the gopis, the cowherd maids or milkmaids of Vrindavan, that if they forgot Sri Krishna for a moment, they used to feel a great anguish. We shall see that in later on. It is called Viraha Agni, the fire of separation. And such a sense of separation breaks the heart of the devotee. And such a pain is, this is very important, such a pain, such an anguish is different from any other pain, suffering we experience. It is altogether a different kind of pain. It's a very sweet pain. It's a pain, but it's a sweet pain. Okay, devotees, in that pain, the pang of separation is there, and also the sweetness of devotion is there. It is an anguish of its own league. We can only get a little glimpse of it, and then if we can amplify that, we probably that is what it is. The glimpse is this: those of us who do regular spiritual practices, say every morning or evening or a particular time, we do spiritual practices for sure. If we miss any day, we cannot do that, then we feel bad about that today we could not do that. It's a kind of dissatisfaction lingers in mind, but that dissatisfaction is not comparable to any other kind of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So that is what, that we are missing something. We missed our daily spiritual practice and not feeling good about that. Probably if we amplify that one many more times, that is what the anguish of a devotee who forgets God even for a moment. Narada will give examples later on. So summary of this aphorism, which is a very important aphorism, is according to Narada, there are two signs of true devotion. One is surrendering all activities, spiritual or so-called secular, to God. Secondly, great anguish in forgetting God. These two, according to Narada, are the characteristics of Parabhakti or expressions of Parabhakti. Now, in the next aphorisms, he will speak about that. Yes, there are examples of such kind of devotion. The gopis of the Vrindavana and dwell on the devotion, extraordinary devotion of the milkmaids of Vrindavana to Sri Krishna. We shall see that later on. Let me see. Questions. Shiva Manasa Puja. Is it those who are still evolving? The Kriya Yogi? Kriya Yogi is the middling one. Parama Bhakta Girish Kumar Ghosh. Yes. Any other question? Any other question or observation about total surrender? Yes, Marika.
Swamiji, if I can just ask. So actually two-part question. The first, let me ask about the second, the extreme anguish reference. Is it less about feeling guilty about, forgetting about God, and more about, for example, the example you gave, let's say I forgot, or for some reason I could not do a practice. Of course, I feel guilty, but to me, it seems what you're talking about is deeper than that. It's not just that, feeling of, I didn't do something I was supposed to do, but really genuine feeling of anguish. If I understand right.
Right. Even that kind of, as I say, that this anguish is a sweet pain. Even there is sweetness in that anguish. This much only I can say. Okay. Rest of the thing we have to just, imagine.
So can one think of it as a litmus test of how much progress a devotee has made towards the path?
Sure. According to Narada, that is the hallmark of bhakti. Hallmark of bhakti.
Okay. And if I may just ask the other part, the first part of the aphorism is about total surrender. So the surrender, the way I understood it, is surrendering all our actions. But can one interpret it even as physically, bodily sensations, physical pain, treat it as sort of, I surrender it. It's not about my personal sensation, but it's part of the, if I'm making any sense. So it's not just, can I interpret it more, not just as just pure action of doing something, but also, my physical being. Not think of it as an isolation, but think of it as part of.
Yes, exactly. And this is what we found, the Shiva Manasa Puja that I quoted, Acharya Shankara's. So he says that whatever, whatever I am experiencing, even through my sense organs, that is nothing but offering to God. Okay. And in Bhagavad Gita, in 4th chapter or 5th chapter, there comes different types of sacrifices. One of them is this Vishaya, I forgot the technical term. It is like this. Whatever even we are experiencing through our senses, that as if I am offering as an oblation to God who is sitting in my heart. So even sensations, we can connect it to God.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Swamiji, I was just thinking, maybe is it possible that when you do this surrendering, it's always, we find that it's easier when you're in difficulty to surrender and to accept, uh, God as your, who looks after you, and you feel it's easier to approach God when you are in trouble. But when things are going well, then we tend to be kind of, we tend to forget the God aspect, right? And so if you offer everything, both your troubles and your joys, then when you offer your joys, you don't take so much of ownership of the joy, because even that belongs to God.
Yeah.
So is that one of the reasons why this approach, it kind of gives you that equipoise of, not being too uh, uh, satisfied or too, pleased with yourself when things are going well? Am I right in presuming that?
Yeah, but if we even surrender our happy things, happy moments to God, that happiness really increases. It is not expressed as, euphoria or anything like that, but that happiness takes another dimension altogether. Every good thing, even if we offer to God, it takes another dimension and becomes more profound. Okay. And the bad things, the pains that we are going through, that if we can surrender to God, they lessens. Yeah, that is the beauty of surrender. All right.
Maharaj.
Yes.
Yeah, Ramanuja has come for this prapatti, and he has 4 or 5 steps. Maybe you should talk on that in the next class or something. Yes.
Yeah, Ramanuja's prapatti. Yeah, there are steps. Okay, I'll see to the.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Maharaj.
Yes. So yes, exactly. One thing I would like to add here, that Sri Ramakrishna gave the example, a bard and self-surrender. That when we have, exhausted all our resources, then we find there is no other way left than to surrender to God. To surrender to God. He gives the example of a bird who was perching on a sail, in a ship, on a, what I should say, on the sail, the sail post from which
Mast.
the mast.
Mast, yeah, mast.
Okay, mast. Okay, and the ship was in the mid of ocean, in the mid of nowhere. There's no island anywhere, and the bird tried to first flow towards the north, towards the south, towards east, towards where, and found no land anywhere. Then came back and sat on the mast again. So Sri Ramakrishna said that devotees in the beginning, they tries to exhaust their all efforts. I will do this many chanting and so many repetitions of God, or meditate for so long, and then they find as the time comes that I have exhausted all my efforts, but I still cannot get a glimpse of. Okay, so let me now surrender. Now I don't know anything, you have to do. Okay, and Sri Ramakrishna says that God really waits for that moment when you have tried your best and then giving up, raising your hand, I cannot do any more. Then that is the moment when God comes and meets us. That is another way of looking at self-surrender or Sharanagati. And it becomes